Jamaal Bowman is a Democratic congressional candidate in New York's 16th congressional district and the founder and principal of a public middle school in New York City. Jamaal, thank you so much for doing the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. Really appreciate being here.
So you're running in New York's 16th congressional district. You are, I guess, still in the process of running against an incumbent Democrat named Eliot Engel. But as of when I was typing up this question, you were winning 61.8% to 34.9%, which is a good place to be. So first question is, how's the vibe today? How you feeling?
Feeling good, man. Feeling good. Can't wait for the final votes to be counted so that we can, declare victory 100%. I mean, right now we're probably about, 85% there. The numbers look great. It's exciting the way people like showed up and showed out for this election all across the district. Early on in the campaign, there were some questions about, how we were doing Westchester and how we were doing Riverdale. But we did well in Riverdale. We did well in Westchester. I think at last count, we had a 29-point lead in the Bronx and a 25-point lead in Westchester. So people, really responded to, our message, and, our message was their message. We pretty much just reiterated what I learned in education over 20 years and 10 years as a middle school principal, and what people were telling us throughout the campaign, housing justice, food justice, fully funding our schools, jobs, racial and economic equality. I mean, those are the issues we ran on. That's what we believe in. And that's why we think people turned out.
So there's probably some listeners who are hearing you for the first time. Can you tell them a little bit about yourself? Like, you were an educator and an education activist for a long time. What made you decide that this year you're going to take the plunge and you're going to actually run for Congress?
Yeah, so born and raised on the Upper East Side, East Harlem section of Manhattan, raised by a single mom with my three sisters, lived in public housing and rent stabilized apartments, went to public schools my entire life, taught in public education, worked in public schools for 20 years, was a teacher in the South Bronx for 5 or 6 years before becoming a dean of students for 3 years at the High School for Arts and Technology, wrote a proposal for a new school, opened a new school in 2009, and did organizing work at that point to not just bring additional resources to the school, but change education policy in a way that really benefited children. Unfortunately, like so many public sector institutions or industries, privatization is something that we had to fight against in public school. So we pushed back against the expansion of charter schools, against standardized testing that was harmful to kids, and just look to transform education in terms of focusing more on educating the whole child and providing a whole holistic approach to our schools. And just that experience and just seeing how, regardless how hard we worked in the school and how great work that we did there, kids still had to go into communities that were neglected and under-resourced, and kids were still not a centerpiece to our political agenda. And as we spoke to people about Congressman Engel's representation or lack thereof, we continue to hear that he was absent and not engaged, and they felt that it was time for a change. And that's when we, decided to get into this race in June 2019.
Yeah. And so, like, typically insurgent campaigns like yours rely on like worn out shoes and face to face, field programs, knocking doors. That must have changed a lot in the
Yeah.
pandemic. How did you adjust? And like, what strategies can Joe Biden or anybody else steal from you to turn people out? Because I mean, look, it's not a it doesn't make me feel good inside when I see gigantic lines at the polls. That means that there's some sort of voter suppression happening, in my opinion, usually.
That's right.
But it did show enormous enthusiasm for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to your point, we did have worn out shoes prior to the pandemic, so we were hitting the ground very aggressively from June until March, early March. We canvassed the entire district aggressively, but specifically the areas that Engel had ignored throughout his 30-year career. So we went to the housing projects and we stayed there throughout the campaign. We went to Co-op City. We went to parts of Yonkers and Mount Vernon and New Rochelle that just felt ignored. And we wanted them to know from the very beginning that we need you to be a part of this conversation, not just in terms of this election, but in terms of our democracy overall. Like, your voice is the power that this district needs, and your voice needs to guide the policy that I'm going to take to Washington to support this district. So we did that early and often, and those relationships were deep, they were authentic, They were not transactional. And we think that's why pivoting to a Zoom world was so much easier for us, because we already did the work in terms of building relationships. And once we pivoted to Zoom, it was all about mutual aid. It was all about dealing with trauma and the stress of the moment, asking people, how are you doing? How are you feeling? How are you coping? What do you need? Is there anything we can do for you? Which led to us supporting, local food pantries in Yonkers, Mount Vernon, and the Bronx, supporting with the delivering of PPEs, and then having the conversation around, I'm running for Congress, here's my background and story, would you be interested in supporting us? And it seems so far seems to have worked out okay.
Yes, it seems like it did. I mean, so it's an amazing story of sustaining momentum. And it makes me think about, how in the wake of George Floyd's murder, there has been so much more awareness and discussion and activism around police brutality and systemic racism. What's your advice to organizers, activists, people on the street for how to sustain that momentum? And then what do you think you can do about it in Congress when you get there?
Yeah, so my advice is don't do it alone, because there's a lot of wear and tear that goes into organizing. And organizing is about building coalitions and relationships and connecting with people that you may not be accustomed to working with or building relationships with. Secondly, you got to meet people where they are. The people in Eden Wall Projects, for example, were so open to our conversations because no one had talked to them in 30 years. No one had made them feel important or part of the process. When I get to Congress, my plan is an inside-outside strategy. All of the organizations, all of the grassroots organizations like Working Families Party, Make the Road Action, Community Voices Heard, the Jewish Vote, and many others, I'm going to continue to work with them because they've been doing the work on the ground with the people for decades, transforming policy at the state level, and leveraging that energy to write the right policy in Washington, and building coalitions even within Congress, whether it's the Progressive Caucus, the Congressional Black Caucus, who historically have not been as progressive. It's hopefully about to change because of the energy we've been able to create throughout this campaign.
So speaking of those coalitions, so your opponent, Eliot Engel, chairs the House Foreign Affairs Committee. So foreign policy got talked about more in this race than you might expect, including, a couple $1 million worth of shitty self-defeating ads that we'll never talk about again because the people who paid for those embarrassed themselves. But so a couple weeks back, you were sent this letter by a guy named Rabbi Weiss about U.S. policy towards Israel. And if I'm being honest, the letter frustrated me so much because there was lots of guilt by association, lots of sort of whataboutisms about why you haven't denounced this person or that activity, like valid issues, but I think that's a way to shut down debate rather than foster it. Yeah. But what I really want to talk about is your response, because it was so gracious and thoughtful. And this line in particular jumped out at me as important, which was, quote, "The rising tide of anti-Semitism in the United States is part of a rise in ethno-nationalism, authoritarianism around the world. In this country, white nationalists threaten Jews and black people alike with violence and terror." And that is so true now. It is scary. It's historically true, right? Like David Duke was a Nazi and a Klansman, still is. How do you think we do a better job of preventing people like Donald Trump from dividing communities that he is also trying to marginalize?
I've spoken from the very beginning of this campaign about our collective struggle and our collective humanity. And I think the COVID pandemic really highlighted and provided a space where we were all dealing with collective trauma together. And there was an opportunity, I think, to bridge the gap between race and class and differences, to have those conversations about our collective humanity, which is what we did throughout the campaign. And Rabbi Weiss's letter, though I agree with you in the tone of it, opened the door to dialogue. And it allowed me to share a response that was anchored in my experiences as a Black man in America. I know what it feels like to, just because of who you are, feel an existential threat from the space in the area in which you are living. And I think that provided me the opportunity to sort of bridge gaps between the African-American community and the Jewish community and the Muslim community, right? There's so many communities that because of xenophobia, Islamophobia, racism, anti-Semitism, so many communities that we can use this opportunity to come together and fight against what I think is a common enemy, which is ethno-nationalism, multinational corporations just looking to not just physically oppress us, but psychologically, emotionally, socially, and economically. So it opened the door to begin a dialogue, and I think the beginning of that dialogue is not only how we defeat Trump, but how we make sure we never have another Donald Trump again in the White House, and we begin to tactically and systemically deal with issues of racism and anti-Semitism, and understanding that they exist within institutions, not just in individuals. Like Donald Trump is a person, but he represents an ideology and institutional discrimination that is my job and all of our jobs to fight against.
Yeah. There was this moment in your victory speech Tuesday night when you said, you know what Donald Trump is more afraid of than anything else? A black man with power. And I love that because it is true. It is clearly true when he was looking at Barack Obama. Do you have thoughts on how you plan to use that power? Like, have you thought about committees you want to serve on? And then maybe more importantly, have you been invited to join the squad?
The squad I thought was like a media thing. I didn't know there was like a squad caucus in Congress. But I'm in contact with my sisters in the squad. So, I look forward to working with them. And, I have thought about committees. Education obviously is one I'm interested in. Budget maybe. But I'm pretty open to those conversations and what that's going to look like. And in terms of leveraging that power, the power of our voices is tremendous, right? And just continuing to lift up the power of my voice individually, but also the voices of my students and families that I've worked with. Because it's all of those experiences that give me the passion and the energy and the purpose to take to Washington. Like I can't forget, my PTA president who ended up homeless and had to live in a shelter in Queens and commute to the Bronx 5 days a week to go to school. I can't forget my student whose father was shot over the weekend, and because there weren't any mental health supports in the school system, we had to do our best job as a staff to support that student. I can't forget the stories of my students and families. They drive everything that I do personally. And it's uplifting those stories and our voices that's going to defeat Trump and people like Trump going forward.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, I got into politics working for Barack Obama in 2004 and 2008. And I don't think I really realized how lucky I was, right? I was like this young kid. I was wide-eyed and hopeful. And every day was inspiring. And it was endless possibilities. And now you look at the news and it sucks, right? Our president is a bigot. He's a bully. And I think the reason I got so excited about your campaign was it felt like an antidote to that, right? You have fun on the campaign trail, you goof around, you dance with kids. I think we saw you whip and nay at points on the trail. What advice for you to have for us who are motivated by fear too often and want to find more joy in this work?
Once the negative ads started coming out against us, which unfortunately that's par for the course, I started talking about the politics of fear versus the politics of love, right? And love sounds like this, this gushy word. Like, what does he mean, love? Well, when you're guided by that, you're guided by humanity, you're guided by compassion, you're guided by empathy, you're guided by what connects us, which is joy and hope and faith. So for me, if I'm not enjoying this process in some way, shape, or form, we're doing it wrong, because right. It's a privilege to be in this position where we have protests all over the country pushing back against police brutality and institutional racism, and it's a privilege. And I'm very fortunate to be a candidate and hopefully congressional elect in this moment, and that brings joy to me. It brings joy to me to have that privilege. And joy is infectious. And if we can share our joy with each other, I think we could begin to shift the narrative and shift the conversation. We don't have to be driven by fear. Even though Trump is atrocious, he doesn't have to dictate how we respond to the day-to-day realities of being in this country. We can respond to each other and to the world differently. And again, for me, I'm an educator. So everything starts with my kids.
Yeah.
And despite going to underfunded schools and despite being in resource communities, our kids came to school every day with a passion for life and love and learning and each other. And there's no way that I can be depressed or fearful or angry when that drives me. And I also have a 6-year-old daughter that I come home to every night. Like, I'm living a dream, man. You know what I'm saying? When you have kids and a daughter, I mean, it's like the best thing in the world. So as much as I can, and last thing I'll say is, I've been blessed with an amazing team, around us for this campaign who works tirelessly, and they're brilliant and they're united and they're driven by making the world a better place. So I'm just very fortunate, and I want to share that with everyone because I think that joy is reciprocal.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, I think there's probably a lot of people who think about what a Congress person looks like or has done and thinks, oh no, I didn't go to law school or I didn't run for the state Senate. And they think that somehow means they shouldn't do it. And I think the opposite is true, right? Like when I saw B-roll of AOC scooping ice in a bar, you realize, okay, that's a human being who can relate to other human beings on a level that is more fundamental, right? So I bet there's a lot of people listening right now who have thought about running for office or who want to run to office but think, I don't have that pedigree, I'm too scared. Like, what advice do you have for them?
Lean into the fear, because it is scary, because you're kind of putting yourself out there and you don't know what's going to come next. But when you lean into the fear, it's like, first of all, you learn so much about yourself and the process, and then other people come along to help you out. And that's the big thing for me. Like I wouldn't be here without the support of everyone who believed in me personally and believed in this movement, who came along to help me out. AOC is a great example because, she's a leader for the working class person and the poor. And if there weren't an AOC, there wouldn't be a me in this situation, because she broke through the glass ceiling in terms of centering the needs of those most disenfranchised in everything that she does. She's that kind of leader and that kind of voice. And she created a space for someone like me to come along and do what I'm doing now. And, I don't have a law degree, but I've worked in public education for 20 years. And it's like, what's the 50 Cent line? Got a Purple Heart for war, but I ain't never left the city. When you're in it and you're doing the work is the work, and the work is transferable. So in whatever industry anyone is working in, whatever job anyone has, Congress needs more, sanitation workers, more nurses, more bartenders, more teachers, more principals. Congress needs more of that, because then our policy will be rooted in the realities of everyday people.
Yeah, agreed. Just sort of along those lines, like, the Biden campaign's got a big decision coming up. They're going to pick a VP. Do you have thoughts on who that person should be, like their character, their values, and how they or she can help inspire and turn out the base of the party?
Yeah, I mean, they should, I think, share the values of, for lack of a better term, the progressive wing of the party, right? Rooting the values in the needs of working class people and the poor in this country, and rooted in the understanding that we have to deal with institutional racism and sexism and classism in all its forms urgently and right now, not through incrementalism, not waiting for someone else to come along and get it done. Like, this is the moment in our history, which is why we released our Reconstruction agenda. We tried to reconstruct after the Civil War, but, Klansmen and white supremacists burned it down. We tried to reconstruct after the Civil Rights Movement, but mass incarceration occurred under Nixon and everyone after Nixon. This is our third chance at it, and targeting criminal justice reform, police reform, and looking at institutional racism and everywhere it exists. We need someone to come in rooted in those values and understanding that lens very clearly and unapologetically, because as we did with this race, we need to galvanize everyone to be a part of our democracy, because if not, Trump will win again, and there'll be more Trumps coming down the line.
Yeah, maybe even literally like his terrible son or daughter or one of those.
Literally, yeah, absolutely.
Let's not talk about it. This was a very hopeful interview. So last question. people listen to this, they think, I like this guy, I want to get involved, I want to help him out. Where should they go? What can they do to make sure you're in Congress?
Yes. So go to bowmanforcongress.com, learn more about, my background and our platform there. Please click the donate button. And if you can donate a couple bucks to help us out, that's always huge. We have an amazing staff. I want to make sure that they can pay their bills. So it helps us to do that. And right now, we're just waiting for the final votes to be counted. But it looks like, we're going to be congressional elect, and it looks like we'll be able to hit the ground running. But we still need tons of support. So please, like bowmanforcongress.com, share the website, share social media, support us in any way that you can, because this movement needs to continue to grow. This is just the beginning. We're not stopping now, and we need everyone's support.
That's very well said. Everyone, check it out. Chip in $5. Jamaal Bowman, thank you so much for doing the show. Thank you for giving me a race to watch that makes me excited about politics and inspired to think about who's going to be in office next year. It's been great.
Awesome. Thank you so much.